December 2001. America's seventh largest company files for bankruptcy. $63 billion gone. Thousands of employees wiped out. Wall Street in shock. But Wall Street wasn't just shocked it happened, they were stunned because no one could explain how. This is the story of Enron, the company that sold nothing, made billions, and then imploded while everyone was still clapping. It started in 1985, with a boring Houston pipeline merger. Just two gas companies combining pipes. Nothing exciting. But then Ken Lay arrived. He had a PhD in economics, a deep tan, and one big idea: deregulation. If the government stopped telling energy companies what to charge, Enron could trade gas like Wall Street trades stocks. Lay hired Jeff Skilling, a fast-talking McKinsey consultant who believed deeply in markets, spreadsheets, and himself. Skilling's pitch: Enron wasn't just a pipeline business, it was a tech company. "We don't sell energy," Skilling told Wall Street. "We sell the future of energy." And Wall Street loved it. The real game changer was Enron Online, a digital marketplace for trading energy contracts. Click a button, move millions. Fortune magazine crowned Enron the most innovative company in America for 6 years straight. Inside Enron HQ, the vibe was intense. Skilling told employees they were the smartest guys in the room. Inside Enron, the culture was brutal. Underperformers were fired fast, bonuses were enormous, and backstabbing was just part of the daily routine. Executives would boast about fake-sounding wins, like landing a contract that guarantees margins through 2009, and nobody questioned it closely. But if you asked a simple question, "What does Enron actually do?" you'd get a shrug, a whiteboard, and 40 minutes of buzzwords. But the stock price kept rising, so no one asked again. The silence of the doubters was bought by the market's applause, and while the spotlight shone brighter and brighter, behind the scenes, something was quietly, dangerously cracking. By the late 1990s, Enron was a legend. The stock skyrocketed from $7 in 1997 to over $90 by 2000. That's over a 1,000% gain in 3 years. If you bought Enron instead of groceries, you were a genius. The media called it a miracle. Executives called it a party. Champagne flowed, and the stock ticker was the DJ. But energy markets aren't TikTok. They don't go viral every week. Enron had promised constant growth, but the market couldn't sustain it. So, they changed the rules. Enter mark-to-market accounting, also known as counting chickens that haven't hatched and may not even be chickens. Here's how it worked. Enron signs a 10-year energy contract. Instead of waiting for actual cash, they counted all 10 years of projected profit immediately. But many of those deals were barely profitable. Some hadn't even started yet. Others were based on projections that made astrology look conservative. Behind the curtain, the machinery was held together with little more than confidence. As long as the quarterly numbers looked perfect, no one dared to suggest the gears were grinding against each other. The image was everything, and it had to hold. Enter Andy Fastow, Enron's chief financial officer. His official job was managing the company's finances. His unofficial job was far more creative: financial storytelling. He was the architect behind a system designed to make the numbers say whatever the company needed them to say. Fastow's masterstroke was creating dozens of outside entities, officially called special purpose entities or SPEs. On paper, they were separate companies, independent from Enron. In practice, they were puppets, totally controlled by Fastow and his team, designed to make bad things disappear. The scam was elegantly simple. Enron would take its worst assets, the deals that were failing, the investments that were losing value, and sell them to these special purpose entities. On paper, it looked like Enron was cleaning house, offloading risk and bringing in fresh cash. But the reality was something else entirely. Enron was secretly funding both sides of the deal. The company was lending money to the SPEs so they could buy the assets from Enron. It was a closed loop, a financial illusion where nothing was actually sold and no risk was actually removed. Think of it this way. Imagine selling your broken car to your dog, then handing your dog your credit card to pay for it, then turning to your spouse and saying, "Look, honey, I made a sale." That was Enron's accounting, a trick that only works if no one checks who holds the leash. Fastow gave these entities absurd names like LJM1, LJM2, and Raptor. They sounded like random passwords or failed video game characters. Nothing about them suggested a serious financial operation. But that was the point. Confusion was the shield. If you couldn't understand it, you couldn't question it. Fastow reportedly shrugged off concerns with a wink. "I'm not breaking the rules," he'd say. "I'm using them creatively. It was the motto of a man who believed the law was a suggestion, a puzzle to be solved, not a boundary to be respected. And while the numbers were being twisted, Enron's top executives were cashing out. Millions in bonuses, stock options sold at the peak, private jets, villas in the Caribbean. The party was real even if the profits were not. They were living the lie, and living it large. But the story was different for the regular employees. They were told to pour their retirement savings into Enron stock. The company's 401k plan was heavily weighted in its own shares. Trust us, they were told. We're the smartest guys in the room. Your future is safe with us. For thousands of employees, their retirement plan had become a single bet. A bet on Enron, a bet on the lie. It wasn't a diversified portfolio. It was a Hail Mary pass wrapped in a 401k form. They didn't know the game was rigged until it was too late. And yet, despite all the red flags, Wall Street analysts kept issuing glowing buy ratings. Firms like Merrill Lynch were making millions managing Enron's stock offerings while publicly praising its financial health. Objectivity was optional. The fees were not. Merrill Lynch, a Wall Street titan, managed Enron's stock offerings, pocketing millions in fees while publicly rating the company a buy. The conflict was glaring, but the money was too good to question. Objectivity was optional on Wall Street. Revenue expectations were not. Analysts who dared to ask tough questions were sidelined, while those who kept the ratings glowing were rewarded with lucrative banking deals. The truth was buried under layers of jargon and spreadsheets, designed by people who treated ethics like a software plugin, optional, confusing, and easy to ignore. Enron's culture rewarded confusion. If you couldn't explain a deal in plain English, you were probably doing it right. Clarity was a weakness. Complexity was a weapon. By 2000, Enron's image was bulletproof. Fortune magazine crowned it most innovative companies for 6 straight years. The stock soared past $90 a share, and Wall Street threw a never-ending parade. August 2001, Jeff Skilling, the CEO who had built Enron's myth, walked into his office, placed a resignation letter on his desk, and left without a word. No scandal, no press conference, just silence. No scandal was announced. Skilling's departure was quiet, almost casual, as if the CEO of America's hottest company was just stepping out for coffee. But the silence was deafening. Skilling said he wanted to spend more time with his family, a red flag the size of Texas, but Wall Street shrugged. They were too busy counting profits to notice the captain jumping ship. That same month, the SEC launched an investigation into Enron's off-balance sheet entities. In corporate speak, it meant, "We smell smoke, but haven't found the bodies yet." The hunt had begun. Ken Lay, the founder, returned as CEO. He smiled like a grandfather who just deleted your homework and said, "Business as usual." But the cracks were spreading faster than he could patch. Inside the company, Vice President Sharon Watkins noticed numbers that didn't add up. She wasn't an accountant, but she knew when something smelled rotten. The stench was unmistakable. Watkins wrote a blunt memo to Ken Lay. "I am incredibly nervous that we will implode in a wave of accounting scandals." She was the first to speak the truth out loud. Ken Lay, back as CEO, reviews Sharon Watkins' memo and decides the real problem is communication, not fraud. A few persistent journalists start asking a simple question. Why is Enron's business so confusing? Reporters dig deeper, asking who actually owns the mysterious offshore entities that keep Enron's liabilities hidden. Enron responds with a PowerPoint presentation, delivering a barrage of buzzwords that say nothing at all. Even the journalists, nodding along, leave the room with no clearer understanding of how Enron actually makes money. In October 2001, Enron finally admits publicly that it made accounting errors, though the statement downplays the scale. The admission reveals that $586 million in earnings were fake, exposing a fraud far larger than anyone suspected. Investors, finally awake, panic and dump Enron stock in a mass sell-off that accelerates the collapse. The stock price craters from nearly $90 per share in August to under $1 by the end of November. In just 4 months, Enron loses 99% of its market value, a collapse of staggering speed and scale. Inside Enron HQ, the atmosphere turns frantic as phones ring non-stop and executives lock themselves in meetings. On December 2, 2001, Enron files for bankruptcy, marking the largest corporate collapse in U.S. history at the time. By December 2, 2001, Enron had filed for bankruptcy. $63 billion in assets were gone. It was the largest corporate collapse in U.S. history. Thousands of employees lost their jobs and their retirement savings overnight. Their 401k plans, which had been heavily weighted in Enron stock, were wiped out. One employee said, "I saved for 20 years, put every bonus into the company plan. I gave them everything." He was now broke. Ken Lay publicly claimed, "I am not a crook," but he had cashed out $70 million in stock before stepping down as CEO. Andy Fastow, the CFO, pocketed $30 million running the very schemes he built, special purpose entities designed to hide losses. While Ken Lay sold millions in his own Enron stock, he urged employees to hold theirs. "The company is strong," he told them. Workers got pink slips, executives got beach houses. The disparity was stark and ugly. But wait, where were the auditors? The people paid to check the numbers and blow the whistle? Enter Arthur Andersen. Once one of the big five accounting firms, it was supposed to be the financial watchdog. Andersen's job was to be the independent watchdog, auditing Enron's books to ensure accuracy and honesty. But Andersen also earned millions in consulting fees from Enron, coaching them on how to structure those very same deals. This conflict of interest was massive, but in the freewheeling 2000s, nobody blinked. The party was too good to stop. Investigators from the SEC and Justice Department started circling Enron like sharks scenting blood. Whistleblowers, like Sharon Watkins, began coming forward, their warnings no longer ignored. Andersen didn't preserve the evidence, they destroyed it. In a frantic bid to cover their tracks, employees began feeding documents into shredders. Thousands of files, memos, and backup tapes were fed into the shredders in a frenzy. The sound of tearing paper filled the Andersen offices as the firm tried to erase 12 years of fraud. Andersen claimed the shredding was just part of their routine retention policy. A standard cleanup, they said. Nothing to see here. Prosecutors didn't buy the routine retention story. They saw the shredded documents as evidence of a cover-up. Charges were filed against the firm. Arthur Andersen was convicted of obstruction of justice. A jury found them guilty for destroying documents that could have revealed the truth. The conviction meant Andersen lost its license to audit public companies. The firm that had been the gold standard of accounting could no longer do its core business. 85,000 Andersen employees lost their jobs overnight. Accountants, consultants, support staff, all gone in a single day. A century-old firm collapsed instantly. Not for committing the fraud itself, but for helping to hide the trail that led to it. Andersen was convicted for helping hide the fraud's trail. They were the accomplice, not the mastermind. But the law came down on them anyway. JP Morgan, Citigroup, and Merrill Lynch had funded Enron's off-books deals. They structured the lies, took their fees, and cashed their bonuses. The banks took their fees, structured the lies, and cashed their bonuses freely. None of them faced criminal charges, only hefty fines. While Enron's executives faced legal fire, the banks that helped them build their house of cards escaped criminal charges. JP Morgan, Citigroup, and Merrill Lynch had structured the off-books deals, collected their fees, and cashed their bonuses, but prosecutors never brought criminal cases against the institutions themselves. The logic was pragmatic. Convicting a bank could destabilize the entire financial system, so they settled for fines instead. Instead of prison time, the banks received hefty financial penalties. JP Morgan paid $135 million in fines, Citigroup $119 million, Merrill Lynch $80 million. Combined, the penalties barely dented their annual profits. For the banks, Enron was just a cost of doing business, a line item in a quarterly report. For Enron's employees, it was a life sentence to poverty. In 2004, 3 years after the collapse, federal prosecutors finally charged the two men at the top. Jeff Skilling, the fast-talking CEO who had built Enron's culture of performance at any cost, and Ken Lay, the founder who had returned to smile through the crisis. Both were indicted on dozens of counts including fraud, conspiracy, and insider trading. Skilling's trial was a spectacle. Prosecutors played tapes of him boasting about Enron's genius, while employees lost their savings. In 2006, the jury convicted him on 19 of 28 counts. The sentence, 24 years in federal prison. Skilling stood silent as the judge read the number, the same man who once told employees they were the smartest guys in the room, now facing the longest walk of his life. Ken Lay, the silver-haired founder who had started it all, never saw a prison cell. On July 5, 2006, just months after his conviction, Lay died of a heart attack at his vacation home in Colorado. He was 64. His death meant the federal government could not collect a single day of his sentence. To many, it felt like the ultimate escape. The man who sold the dream died free, surrounded by the wealth he had built on lies. Andy Fastow, the architect of Enron's shadow empire, took a different path. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of conspiracy and agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. His sentence, 6 years. Far lighter than Skilling's, but enough to make him a pariah. Fastow had built the special purpose entities, named them LJM and Raptor, and turned accounting into an art of deception. In the end, he traded his freedom for a shorter fall. The scandal sent shockwaves through Washington. Congress, embarrassed by its failure to regulate, scrambled to act. In July 2002, just months after Enron's bankruptcy, lawmakers passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, officially titled the Public Company Accounting Reform and Investor Protection Act. It was the most sweeping financial reform since the Great Depression, designed to restore trust in a system that had failed spectacularly. The new law's most famous provision: CEOs must personally certify their company's financial statements. No more hiding behind accountants or lawyers. If the numbers were wrong, the boss went to jail. It was a simple idea, but revolutionary. For the first time, the person at the top had skin in the game. Skilling and Lay had signed off on Enron's lies. Under Sarbanes-Oxley, they would have faced even harsher consequences. But reform came too late for Enron's victims. The thousands of employees who had lost their retirement savings, their jobs, their homes, could not get them back. The new rules might prevent the next disaster, but they could not undo the past. For every worker who had believed in the company and watched it vanish, Sarbanes-Oxley was a cold comfort, a bandage on a wound that had already healed into a scar. But Enron was never just a story about fraud. It was a story about collective belief, about what happens when an entire system decides to see only what it wants to see. Wall Street analysts, journalists, regulators, investors, employees, everyone played a role. The lie was not just told, it was welcomed. Enron sold an idea, and the world bought it because the alternative, admitting they did not understand, was too uncomfortable. The world wanted to believe. Enron was the future, the smartest guys in the room, the company that could not fail. So when the numbers got confusing, when the jargon became impenetrable, when questions were met with buzzwords, no one pushed harder. It was easier to nod, to buy the stock, to keep the party going. Asking the hard question, where is the actual money, would have meant admitting the emperor had no clothes. For 16 years, Enron sold an imaginary future, and everyone bought in. The company promised endless growth, infinite innovation, a world where energy was traded like magic. But when the lights came on, the building was hollow. The numbers were fake, the profits were phantom, and the smartest guys in the room had vanished. Enron did not just collapse, it revealed a truth about how markets work. Belief is the most powerful currency of all. When the lights came on, the building proved hollow inside. Every floor of Enron's Houston Tower held debt disguised as profit, promises without cash, and a culture that had mistaken complexity for genius. The smartest guys in the room had simply vanished. Jeff Skilling resigned without warning. Ken Lay died before serving a day. Andy Fastow pleaded guilty and cooperated. The architects of the illusion disappeared, leaving employees and investors holding nothing. As someone once said, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. Enron's lie circled the globe for 16 years, but when the truth finally dressed, it walked straight into a courtroom. So what's the golden thread here? Enron wasn't just a fraud. It was a warning about what happens when belief becomes a currency. We trusted the story more than the numbers, and the story was a masterpiece of misdirection. The central metaphor of Enron is that belief itself can be currency. Investors didn't buy gas or electricity, they bought a story of genius and growth, and as long as everyone believed the story was worth real money. Enron's rise mirrors how markets reward confident storytelling. The more Skilling and Lay spoke about the future, the higher the stock climbed. They weren't selling results, they were selling certainty, and markets pay a premium for certainty, even when it's fake. Mark-to-market accounting taught a harsh lesson. Booking future profit today is risky. Enron counted all 10 years of a contract as revenue immediately. When actual cash didn't arrive, they had to invent more deals to cover the gap. It's like building a house of cards on a foundation of promises. Off-balance sheet tricks show hidden debt can sink companies. Enron created special-purpose entities to hide billions in liabilities. They were legal but deceptive, and when the debt surfaced, it wasn't just the company that drowned. It was everyone who trusted the clean books. Auditor conflicts of interest undermined the entire financial trust system. Arthur Andersen was paid millions to audit Enron while also consulting for them. They were the referee, coach, and scorekeeper all at once. When the game turned crooked, they shredded the playbook. Analysts paid by companies they rate lose objectivity. Wall Street firms like Merrill Lynch earned millions from Enron stock offerings while issuing buy ratings. Their independence was a fiction, and investors trusted that fiction until the stock hit zero. Employees over-concentrated in employer stock risk everything together. Enron encouraged workers to pour their 401k into company shares. When the company collapsed, they lost both their jobs and their savings. Diversification isn't boring, it's survival. Executives cashing out while employees hold reveals a warning sign. Kin Lay sold $70 million in stock while urging workers to buy more. Skilling cashed out millions before resigning. When insiders flee, it's time to ask why. They knew the house was burning. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 was Congress's response, forcing CEOs to personally certify financial reports and auditors to stay independent. But regulation always runs behind disaster. It's a fire extinguisher, not a fireproof building. Enron's stock soared from $7 to $90 in 3 years, proof that price alone never validates a business model. A rising ticker can cheerlead a hollow company right up to the cliff edge. If a company's business model requires 40 minutes of buzzwords to explain, that's not sophistication, it's a warning siren. Enron's complexity was a smokescreen, not a strategy. Complex financial structures like Enron's special purpose entities aren't signs of innovation, they often mask fragility. When the math gets opaque, the risk is usually hiding in plain sight. Enron's collapse didn't just kill a company, it rewrote the rules of auditing and corporate governance. Arthur Andersen vanished, and a new era of oversight began, but the scars remain. The golden thread of this story, illusions glitter brightest right before they unravel. Enron's gilded surface was so dazzling that everyone forgot to check if there was anything underneath. That same golden thread, belief without scrutiny, is what built Enron's fraud. Investors, analysts, and employees all chose to trust the story over the numbers, and the thread snapped. Today's investors still chase confident stories over clear numbers. Every new hype cycle, crypto, SPACs, AI, echoes Enron's lesson. Charisma is not a business model. Due diligence means asking simple questions. Where is the cash? Who are the customers? How do you make money? And demanding answers as clear as the balance sheet should be. Enron employees lost their life savings because they trusted their employer's stock. A golden rule of personal finance. Never bet your retirement on the company that signs your paycheck. Understanding money mechanics, how companies hide losses, how auditors can fail, how complexity masks risk, is the best armor against the next Enron. The story is the same, only the names change. This is a history lesson, not investment advice. Enron's story teaches us to question, to verify, and to never confuse a good story with a sound business. The thread is fragile, handle it with care. If this story of illusion and collapse taught you something new, hit subscribe. There are more golden threads waiting to be pulled. So back to where we began. December 2001, the biggest bankruptcy in U.S. history. But now you know the machinery behind the fall. The accounting tricks, the complicit auditors, the belief that made it all possible. The golden thread through this story is simple. When you stop asking where the money actually comes from, you're not investing, you're believing. And belief, untethered from reality, always ends the same way. That lesson isn't just for history books. Every day, new companies, new markets, new promises ask you to believe without looking. The question is, will you ask where the money is? Because the mechanics of money never change, only the costumes do. Enron wore a tech company's mask. Tomorrow's bubble will wear something else. But the pattern is always the same. So the next time someone tells you about a company that's too complex to understand, remember Enron. Complexity isn't sophistication, it's often the smokescreen for something missing. And if you ever find yourself in a room where everyone is the smartest person there, be the one who asks the dumb question. That's how you spot the cracks before the whole thing falls. Because the real story of Enron isn't about fraud. It's about a system that rewarded belief over truth, that paid auditors to look away, that made billionaires out of storytellers. That system hasn't changed. The rules are tighter, but the incentives are the same. So stay sharp, keep asking, and never let a good story replace a hard look at the numbers. Thanks for walking this golden thread with me. If you want to understand the mechanics behind the next big story, I'll be here. Until then, keep your eyes open and your questions sharper.